There is a gray fireproof lockbox hidden behind the water heater in the basement laundry room of a century-old 6-unit apartment building on Mill Street. For 4 years, that box held the only original copy of a co-ownership agreement signed by me and my son-in-law, plus a note from my late husband warning me not to trust them. By the time I opened it, Derek had already forged a quitclaim deed, sold the building to a developer for $910,000, and left me a $5,200 vacancy check like I was a tenant being bought out of a lease. Today, he unclogs the basement drains in a gray coverall with the words "drained my trust" stitched across the back, and every new lease prints his deed fraud docket on the last page. I was 54 years old, retired after 27 years as a mail carrier on Route 17, and I knew the exact weight of a standard mailbox lock by feel because my father had been a locksmith before he died. My husband Tom had passed 4 years earlier after a quiet battle with pancreatic cancer. He was the type of man who kept every receipt in a shoebox and balanced our checkbook every Sunday night with a sharp pencil, and he saw through Derek long before I ever wanted to. His life insurance payout came 19 days after his funeral, $143,000. My daughter Karen and her husband Derek sat across from me at my kitchen table 3 weeks after the burial, smiling like they had already solved my loneliness. Derek unfolded a listing for a century-old 6-unit apartment building on Mill Street. He said I could buy it with the insurance money. He would manage the maintenance and repairs, and in exchange he would take a 45% stake and a lifetime lease on the ground floor unit. I was not stupid, but I was grieving, and Karen kept saying, "Mom, you need a project. We just want to help." Derek signed the co-ownership agreement that afternoon in front of a notary, and I watched his hand move across the page. I put the original copy in Tom's old fireproof lockbox because I did not trust Derek with the only piece of paper that proved I owned anything. I could not have known then that Tom had already seen the whole thing coming. Tom had made me memorize the lockbox combination and told me, "If you ever need to prove who you are, the truth is in the box." 4 years later, on a Tuesday in October, I came home from the grocery store to find a formal notice taped to my front door. It said the property at 1630 Mill Street had been sold to a developer named Whitfield Properties for $910,000. Included was a check for $5,200 issued to me for voluntary vacancy, as if I were a tenant being bought out of a lease. The check had no rent ledger attached, no escrow account number, and the payer was a title company I had never heard of. I held it up to the light in my kitchen. The routing number was real, the paper had a faint watermark, and the memo line said voluntary vacancy, final disbursement. My hands were steady because after 27 years of carrying mail, you learn to hold panic in your legs and walk anyway. I called Derek. He answered on the second ring and said, "Oh good, you got the check." Then he and Karen arrived within the hour. Karen hugged me too hard and said she was moving me into their spare room for my own good. Derek called a junk removal service and began sorting my belongings into 2 piles, keep and donate. He had a clip in his shirt pocket and a self-storage brochure on the counter. When he reached the basement laundry room, he pointed at the small gray lockbox behind the water heater and asked if it was Tom's old box. I said yes. Karen picked it up, shook it, heard paper sliding, and said, "It's just old receipts, Mom. Trash." She tossed it onto the discard pile. Derek nodded and kept pulling detergent bottles off the shelf. I waited until they went upstairs to measure curtains. Then I retrieved that box and carried it down the block to the post office where I had worked for 27 years. I asked my old supervisor Rita if I could sit in the break room for 10 minutes. She looked at my face and handed me the key to the training room. I opened the lockbox with Tom's combination, our anniversary, and found the original co-ownership agreement folded flat. Underneath it was a folded piece of yellow legal paper in Tom's handwriting. It said, "Do not trust them. Save yourself." He had written it years before he died after Derek first asked me to co-sign a car loan. Tom had told me then that Derek was a man who mistakes other people's money for his own. I spread the original agreement on the training room table and pulled up the county recorder's online records on Rita's computer. The deed transfer from me to Derek had my name spelled wrong, Catherine instead of Catherine, and the signature was a perfect flowing loop, not the cramped vertical hand I used after breaking my wrist in 1998. I had signed 10,000 certified mail receipts in my life, and I knew what my own hand looked like. This was not it. I printed the county records, called the recorder's office from the post office, and learned that a quitclaim deed had been filed 17 days earlier by a mobile notary whose stamp number belonged to a notary in another county. The clerk told me she had flagged the recording because the notary's commission had expired in 2021, and the stamp number belonged to a woman who had died 2 years before the deed was signed. The clerk placed a temporary hold on the recording. That was when I decided to play along and find out exactly how deep the hole went. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe family should be held to the same legal standard as strangers. Now back to the part where they tried to make me their house guest. Derek and Karen spent the next 3 days trying to convince me to sign a limited power of attorney so they could finalize the sale. Karen said it was just paperwork to protect me from liability. Derek said the developer needed to close by Friday, and my cooperation would speed up my moving expenses. I played foggy. I said I was tired, confused by all the legal language, worried about losing my pension. I made them repeat themselves slowly while I watched their hands. Derek's right foot bounced every time he said the word power. Karen kept checking her phone. I signed nothing. I told them I wanted to read everything, and I asked if my mail would be forwarded to their house. They exchanged a look, and Karen said, "Of course, Mom." Derek took my front door key and my mailbox key for safekeeping. He said the closing company needed them for the final walkthrough. I let him take the ring because it did not have the post office key or the key to Tom's lockbox. Within 2 days, I was living in their spare room, with my things in 4 boxes and the lockbox hidden inside a bag of yarn under the bed. The room smelled like acrylic paint and old tax returns, and they put a baby monitor on the nightstand so they could hear me at night. On Monday morning, Derek brought a mobile notary into the kitchen. The man had a polyester tie and a stamp that looked too new. He slid a limited power of attorney across the table and said, "Just sign here, ma'am." I looked at the top line. It gave Derek authority to sell the building, sign deeds, and access all bank accounts. I pretended to have a coughing fit and spilled my tea. By the time Karen brought a towel, the notary had packed up and left. Derek called me useless under his breath. I made a note that the notary's name was different from the one on the forged deed. That night, I unscrewed the baby monitor from the wall and put it in a drawer lined with sweaters. If they wanted to hear me, they were going to hear my flashlight click and the sound of me reading their own mail. Their spare room was directly across the hall from Derek's home office. The walls were thin enough that I could hear every frustrated phone call. On my 3rd night there, I lay awake listening to Derek argue with someone about a title gap. He kept saying my mother-in-law's signature is on file. Just push it through. A woman's voice said the underwriter rejected the notary acknowledgement because the notary's commission had expired. Derek threw a coffee mug. Karen whispered that we needed to keep me calm until Monday. I rolled onto my side and started counting the financial terms I had learned from reading mail on my route: escrow, lien, closing disclosure, power of attorney. I knew I was being set up, and I knew they thought I was too foggy to notice. The next night I heard Derek call someone at 2 a.m. and speak in short bursts, then hang up and dial again. The number he left on a sticky note in the kitchen was for a private lender who charged 4 points up front. I copied it onto the inside of a gum wrapper. During the day, they spent money like they had already won. Derek bought a $70,000 truck with dealer financing. Karen ordered custom leather chairs for the living room. She said it was important to keep up appearances for the developer. I started watching their mail. I had delivered mail for 27 years, so I knew how to read a bank statement through a thin envelope by holding it up to the dining room light. There were notices from a hard money lender, a second mortgage company, and a collection agency for a timeshare in Florida. Derek had been bleeding money for years, and my building was the tourniquet he planned to use. They had a stack of unopened invoices in the kitchen drawer, and Karen returned $2,000 of handbags on Thursday to keep a credit card from being declined. On Friday morning, the garbage disposal jammed. Derek stood at the sink flipping the switch and cursing while Karen tapped her phone. She said she would call a plumber for $300. I got up, unplugged the unit, pulled the rubber splash guard, and used a wooden spoon to break up the coffee grounds. Then I pressed the red reset button on the bottom and plugged it back in. It ran smooth. Derek stared at me like I had performed a magic trick. Karen said, "Thanks, Mom." I smiled and said, when you carry mail, you learn how to fix everything on a route. The truth was I had spent 30 years as a single mother before Tom, unclogging drains and rewiring lamps, and I knew a fake helpless act when I saw one. They were not helpless. They were stalling. The shut-off valve under their kitchen sink was installed backwards and had been leaking for a year, which told me Derek's maintenance skills were a sales pitch, not a trade. I waited until they left for a closing document signing on Saturday afternoon. Then I went into the home office. The filing cabinet was a black 2-drawer unit with a cheap wafer lock. I had a bobby pin and a small flathead screwdriver in my purse. Wafer locks are easier than people think. You rake the pins with the pick while applying light tension with the screwdriver, and the cylinder turns. I had it open in 40 seconds. Inside were 3 folders. The first was a quitclaim deed transferring my 55% interest in 1630 Mill Street to Derek. My signature was on it, but not my hand. I knew the difference because I had signed my name 700 times a year for 27 years, and my thumb always hesitated on the second letter. This signature flowed smooth and fast, like someone who had practiced for weeks. The first folder also held a photocopy of my driver's license with the address altered to their house, a fake notary stamp, and a forged power of attorney naming Derek as my attorney in fact. The second folder was a closing statement from Whitfield Properties. The purchase price was $910,000. After paying off a first mortgage of $380,000 and a home equity line of $210,000, both in my name and both with my forged signature, Derek netted almost $300,000. The third folder was a promissory note for the same home equity line, secured by the building, with a maturity date in 6 months. I had never seen it. The note had a confession of judgment clause, which meant if I defaulted, the lender could seize my pension and Social Security without a court hearing. Derek had set me up to be the legal scapegoat for his debt. There was also a wire transfer receipt showing $120,000 wired from the title company to an account at a bank in the Cayman Islands under a shell company called DKM Holdings. He had been preparing for this for years. I found a trash bag in the garage full of shredded paper. I took it to the basement and sorted the strips by color and edge pattern, then taped them together on a piece of cardboard. It was a page from the original title insurance policy showing Derek had forged my signature on a general warranty deed 2 months earlier. Underneath the workbench, I found an accordion folder labeled Xmas Lights with a sticky note in Derek's handwriting that said Catherine's signature slower. He had practiced my name on a yellow legal pad, and the indentations were still visible on the page beneath. I photographed everything with my phone, put the folders back exactly as I had found them, and relocked the cabinet. Derek never noticed, because he never looked at his own files closely enough to see the hairline scratch I left on the lock face. I knew how to read a truth-in-lending statement from the years I had spent watching Tom balance our ledgers, and every number on those pages told the same story. Derek was going to let me take the fall for his debt while he walked away clean. I also called the Social Security Administration from a pay phone outside the library and asked them to put a verbal password on my account. My payments would not be rerouted without the password. I called the 3 credit bureaus and placed a fraud alert on my file, then checked systems to freeze new checking account activity in my name. I did not need a computer to know how to protect myself. I needed a phone and a list of account numbers. I had both. On Sunday, I took the lockbox to Ruth Ackerman, a title attorney who lived on my old mail route. I had delivered every certified closing package to her office for 11 years, and she remembered my name. She opened the original co-ownership agreement and turned to Clause 14. She looked up over her glasses and said, "Tom was a smart man. He had this clause inserted 3 days before you signed. It says any sale, conveyance, or encumbrance of the property requires both owners to appear in person at the county recorder's office at the same time, and any attempted unilateral transfer forfeits the offending party's interest to the other co-owner." Derek never saw this because he signed the signature page separately. "Your forged deed violates this clause, so it is void." Then she showed me the notary acknowledgement on the forged deed. The notary's commission expired in 2021, 2 years before the deed was signed. That is a felony in this state. Ruth called the compliance officer at the title company that handled the developer's purchase. The compliance officer confirmed that Derek had presented a fake power of attorney and had told them I was in cognitive decline. They had already flagged the file because my name was misspelled on the deed, and the seller's information did not match my social security number. They were about to freeze the escrow account, but they needed me to come in and provide a sworn affidavit. Ruth said, "We need you to wear a recording device to the final correction signing on Tuesday. If Derek tries to force you, we will have him on tape." I agreed. That was the first time in 4 years I felt like I was not alone. Ruth also called the lender on the home equity line, and they confirmed the loan was funded using a notarized signature that did not match my signature card at the bank. They put an immediate freeze on the draw period. The compliance officer, Janelle Cross, emailed me a secure link to upload the photographs I had taken, and I used the public library scanner because I knew Derek had installed remote monitoring software on the house Wi-Fi. I never logged into their network with any device I cared about. Ruth filed a lis pendens on the property that afternoon, which clouded the title and prevented the developer from reselling before we filed our suit. She also requested an emergency hearing for a temporary restraining order freezing the forged deed. The judge signed it at 4:47 that evening. On Monday evening, I decided to test them. I had not fully accepted that my daughter would let her husband destroy me. I needed to know if there was any loyalty left. I waited until Karen was in the kitchen, and Derek was on the phone with the title company. I walked into the living room, clutched my chest, and collapsed onto the carpet. I made my breathing shallow and let my eyes flutter closed. Karen looked over and said, "Mom," then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and said, "Derek, the buyer wants the correction deed signed tonight." Derek stepped over my legs without looking down, grabbed his folder from the coffee table, and said, "Leave her. She is probably faking." Karen hesitated for maybe 3 seconds, then followed him. I heard the front door close. I lay there on the carpet for 10 full minutes, staring at the ceiling, thinking about all the school lunches I had packed for Karen, all the times I had covered her rent, all the family dinners where Derek had smiled and called me Mom. I remembered the year Karen needed stitches in her hand, and I walked her 9 blocks to the clinic because Derek had taken the car and turned off his phone. I remembered lending Derek $6,000 for a business class that turned out to be a scam. My residual family loyalty did not just die. It was buried under the sound of their footsteps walking out the door. Tuesday morning, I put on a blue cardigan, tucked the original co-ownership agreement into my purse next to the recording device Ruth had given me, and let Derek drive me to the title company. He kept checking the rearview mirror and snapping at Karen about a coffee stain on his shirt. Karen sat in the back seat with me, her hand on my arm like a nurse, and said, "This is just a formality, Mom. You trust us, right?" I said nothing. I clicked the recording device on with my thumb and felt the tiny vibration in my palm. We parked outside a low-glass office building with a sign that said Northbridge Title and Escrow. Inside, a receptionist led us to a conference room with a long table and a stack of papers. Derek sat across from me and pushed a document toward me. It was called a corrective grant deed. He said, "Just sign here, Mom. It confirms the vacancy check." I looked at it. My name was misspelled again, and the notary block was dated that same morning. I asked for a copy. Derek said there was no time. Karen said, "Stop being difficult." I put my hands flat on the table and read the first paragraph. It said I acknowledged the prior transfer as valid and surrendered all remaining interest in the property. I looked at Derek's face. His right foot was bouncing so hard the table shook. I set the pen down and said, "No. I spent 27 years delivering paper that told the truth. This paper lies." Derek stood up. He said, "You will sign this right now or you lose everything." Karen grabbed my wrist. I did not move. The door opened. Ruth Ackerman stepped in with 2 sheriff's deputies and the title company's compliance officer, a woman named Janelle Cross. Janelle said, "The escrow account is frozen pending an investigation for wire fraud and elder financial abuse." Derek tried to grab the corrective deed from the table. One of the deputies put a hand on his chest and pressed him back into his chair. The other deputy read him his rights. Karen started crying and saying she had nothing to do with it. Ruth opened the original co-ownership agreement to Clause 14 and read it aloud. Any sale, conveyance, or encumbrance of the property requires both owners to appear in person at the county recorder's office at the same time, and any attempted unilateral transfer forfeits the offending party's interest to the other co-owner. She looked at Derek and said, "Your forged deed is void. Your 45% interest is forfeited. "You are under arrest." Janelle Cross handed me a sworn affidavit, and I signed it right there in front of a notary with my real hand, the cramped vertical hand I have used since 1998. The recording device captured every word, including Derek's threat and Karen's hand on my wrist. Derek was charged with forgery in the first degree, identity theft, grand theft by deception, and conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. The developer's purchase was unwound. The title company filed a suspicious activity report with the Treasury Department. The county recorder recorded a notice of fraudulent deed. I walked out of that office with the original agreement in my purse and my building back. 2 years later, Derek was sentenced to 6 years in state prison for forgery, identity theft, and elder financial abuse, with 11 additional years of supervised release. The judge ordered restitution of $143,000, which Derek could not pay because his assets were seized. The developer sued him for the failed closing costs and won a judgment that took his truck and his savings. Karen filed for divorce and moved to another state. She sends me a birthday card every year, and I throw it away unopened. The title company unwound the sale, and Clause 14 of the original co-ownership agreement forfeited Derek's 45% interest to me. I became the sole owner of 1630 Mill Street. I renamed it Unit of Deceit Rentals. I repainted the sign myself. For the first year, I lived in the ground floor unit because Derek had trashed it. I repaired the plaster, refinished the maple floors, and replaced the boiler's circulator pump with a spare part from a hardware store on 9th Street. I hired a property manager, and then I hired Derek after his release as a maintenance worker, because the judge allowed him to work off restitution under a strict court order. He shows up every Tuesday and Thursday in a gray coverall, with the words "drained my trust" stitched across the back. He unclogs the basement drains, fixes the mailboxes, and hauls out the trash. Every new tenant signs a lease with an addendum that prints his deed fraud docket number on the last page. His paycheck is garnished direct to the court and then routed to restitution, and I use that money to fund a small rent relief account for tenants who fall behind. I do not feel sorry for him. I feel satisfied. I keep Tom's note in the same fireproof lockbox next to the original agreement. He saw this coming before I did. He could not stop it from the grave, but he left me the key. Not a literal key, but a clause that said my presence and my consent were the only things that mattered. He knew that Derek would always need me to show up and sign, and he made sure that if I refused, the whole scheme would collapse. That is what love looks like. Integrity is not a luxury. It is the load-bearing wall of any family, and once it cracks, you either tear the house down or shore it up with consequences. Have you ever discovered a dark secret about someone you trusted completely? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. If this story reminded you to keep your own records safe, hit like and subscribe for more stories about family, betrayal, and the quiet satisfaction of watching the truth catch up. Until next time, keep your evidence close and your signature closer.